Governor Rick Scott is doing exactly what he said he would do when he took office. He is trying to create an environment in the state of Florida where jobs can grow, and not just grow, but flourish, where corporations that have located in other places of the world, other places around the country, choose to come here. There are a lot of great reasons for coming here. We talked about the weather. How about the income tax environment here, that there is no state income tax? But there were other issues, other hurdles, and the governor has dutifully been trying to deal with those, some more successfully than others. But the efforts to bring jobs has not been without criticism and concern. And we have Dan Krasner on this program. I appreciate a lot of the work that Dan does with Integrity Florida. But they just released a report suggesting that Enterprise Florida is not necessarily growing the state's job market appropriately. And to offer a slightly different view of that is Mark Wilson, president of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Mark, good morning. Welcome back. How are you?
Good morning, Preston. Thanks for having me this morning.
Have I characterized this fairly?
Oh, I think so. I think the bigger angle, though, is it's a Washington, D.C. group that's put out a national report targeting 8 states with Republican governors, states like Texas, states like Wisconsin, states like Ohio, that have been growing their private sector. And we have a Washington, D.C., pretty far left, heavily unionized agenda coming into these states, suggesting that growing the private sector isn't working. And Preston, you use a lot of sports analogies. This reminds me of when you're in the middle of a game and people are taunting you. You point up to the scoreboard, and all of a sudden you have to ask, what's this really all about? Florida's working in every sense. We're the envy of the country in private sector job creation, and frankly, we have Governor Scott and Secretary Swope to thank for it.
The accusation is of cronyism. People hear that word. They're sometimes confused by it. They're not exactly sure what it means. It sounds kind of bad.
Right.
But the suggestion in the report is that Enterprise Florida, in essence, sells seats on its board, and those board members get return for that investment.
Sure. So that accusation's made across the country, that if you make a contribution to the state's economic development efforts, to the private sector initiative to grow jobs, and then you sit on that board, that somehow there's a return to you. These are companies that are investing in Florida because they want to help diversify our economy. But what's never talked about in these reports, Preston, it's just not true. There's absolutely no connection to serving on the board of an economic development group and getting some kind of a return directly to you personally or to your company. It just doesn't happen.
So in these other states where they're alleging that there's cronyism, it's just fictitious, or are there mistakes made in other states and it just gets broadly applied elsewhere?
Well, first of all, I think in terms of Florida's done it right. States from Arizona to Georgia to North Carolina have either or are looking at modeling their private sector economic development efforts exactly after the way Florida did it. We have built-in transparency. We have built-in checks and balances. Remember, it was the Florida Chamber Foundation back in the early 90s that first suggested that we shut down our state's government-run economic development efforts and move them to a public-private partnership model. It was Democrat Governor Lawton Chiles who actually championed the idea and with bipartisan support made it happen. So there are clearly examples on both sides of the aisle in other states where they haven't got it right over the years, long time ago. Wisconsin's probably the most recent example. Several years ago, their state-run economic development program wasn't working. So the private sector had to get involved. The author of this report actually admitted on the phone last week, Preston, that there's no new information in their report. They're using information that's 3 years old or older, and then they're attacking these 8 states with Republican governors acting like this is new information. And to insinuate that what's happened in a state like Wisconsin has anything to do with an incredible track record of what's happened in Florida is a little suspect.
Mark Wilson with the Florida Chamber of Commerce, my guest here for a few moments this morning on the morning show. Mark, when you look at what's happened in the state of Florida, the job curve is on the right path. It's fighting against tremendous currents of economic uncertainty that comes to us from the federal perspective. If I were to ask you from your chair as head of the chamber, what is the most important thing that Rick Scott's doing right now that the average person needs to take note of? Not the people on the inside that kind of see this stuff every day, but the average person, the voter out there that may not necessarily be paying attention. What's Rick doing well?
Well, I think it's pretty easy to see that. He's staying focused on the main thing, and that is private sector job creation. And as much as many these union organizations and the media want to take him off task, I think when the history books are written, I think there's going to be an entire chapter, the first chapter, on the importance of having a governor that stays ultra-focused on private sector job creation, especially small business job creation. And I would say it this way. Every listener that you have either has a job or benefits from the private sector. All taxes that are collected come from people having a job. It's how we pay teachers. It's how we build roads. It's how we do what we do. So I think the most important thing that this governor and his administration are doing is he ran on a platform of providing private sector jobs, and now we're one of the top 3 states in the country. We've reduced our debt. We've reduced the size of government. We've reduced over 2,000 regulations. And, again, I point to the scoreboard. Last year in Florida, over 3,000 new companies either moved to Florida or were created in Florida in 1 year. Over 130,000 jobs, 330,000 in 3 years. The rest of the country is looking at Florida, and they want to know, how do we do that?
Mark, thanks for the time this morning.
Thank you.